It was 2018 and that day I will remember forever, and it still gives me goosebumps when I remember it. My name is Enrico and I am 60 years old. That day I was in the car on the way to a friend's house, as I often did. The day was calm, but while driving I felt a sudden feeling of tiredness, as if my body had run out of energy. Suddenly the steering wheel veered to the right and everything changed in an instant. I lost control and the car skidded, crashing into a barrier. The impact was violent, my breathing stopped and an unbearable pain pierced me, but after a few moments, that pain disappeared, leaving room for a surreal silence. I found myself suspended as if I had left my body and was looking at the scene from above. Everything was so clear, so real, but with an inexplicable peace that seemed to dominate everything. After my eyes closed, an oppressive darkness enveloped me. Suddenly I seemed to be suspended in an empty, silent space where time did not exist. At first there was a strange calm, almost anesthetized. The air began to change, it became icy cold, as if the cold came from inside my own soul. Around me, indistinct shadows appeared and disappeared, similar to barely visible faces floating on the periphery of my vision. Then I began to distinguish figures that approached. They were familiar faces, icons of a past life, famous people who seemed to have gotten lost in this gloomy place. At first I saw them motionless like statues, but slowly they came closer with cold glances and mocking smiles. Their eyes were empty and seemed hollowed out by suffering. When one of them spoke, his voice was broken, like a whisper and a growl together, and his tone was full of bitterness. "So you too, at last," he said. I felt that each word was tearing something apart inside me, exposing every fear, every mistake and guilt like a painful reflection. I tried to retreat, but it seemed like I was trapped in a black, slimy web, a prison without walls, from which I could not escape. Each figure underlined a failure of mine, a fall of mine, and the tone became more and more threatening, as if they fed on my terror. When it seemed that all the heat had disappeared, I realized where I was: an infinite expanse of tormented shadows, a place that seemed the reflection of every nightmare ever lived. And as the cold entered more and more into my heart, I understood that my soul had been sucked by something frightening, something that tried to show me a truth buried and perhaps inexorable. Suddenly in front of me a long, dark corridor appeared, and I felt pushed towards its end, where there seemed to be something I had to see. At every step a dark, restless energy enveloped me, as if the ground itself emitted a lamenting murmur. At the end of the corridor a large dark opening seemed to pulsate with a strange energy, as if it were alive. Through the entrance I found myself in a huge cavern that seemed to have no end, aided by an immense rock wall similar to a broken mountain. It was a gloomy and mysterious place, and its slopes were covered with figures weighed down by thick chains, motionless like statues. Climbing that path cost me every fragment of energy. It was as if each step consumed a part of my soul, emptying. I would never have thought to see a woman with refined features but with a desperate look. She was sitting on a peak, solitary, surrounded by emptiness. She had the same elegant charm of someone who belonged to another era, someone whom the world had loved and admired. She was an iconic figure called Princess Diana, but here she seemed a faded shadow of her former glory. Her face, although recognizable, was marked by suffering. In her eyes there was a deep fatigue, like that of someone who is a prisoner of an infinite loneliness. I approached her, and for a moment her eyes fell on me, trying to express a sadness that had no words. She whispered something to me, her voice cracked by an indescribable pain. Her gaze seemed to implore understanding, but also a story of torments that I could not explain. And as I continued looking at her, I understood that the suffering in that place was something that could not be avoided or explained. It was a place where the soul was eternally suspended in a torment in which each regret resurfaced heavier and more painful than I could imagine. It is very easy to understand why I am here, if someone knew how I really lived, Diana began, her voice marked by a bitterness that seemed carved. In the time of youth was different. I remember when I believed in a simple and pure love and in the Christian faith with a sincere conviction. My family had raised me with certain values and I dreamed of building a family that reflected that purity. But entering the royal family changed everything. I saw my own heart transform, and not always into something beautiful, She paused as if to gather the courage to confess what she had never revealed. I did discover child relationship with Camilla before, but the truth is that our bond was already worn out, and I had also sought refuge in other people. Before knowing it, life at court consumes you, turns you into someone you don't recognize. The coldness, the lack of true affection, the facade you must maintain, all this has turned me into a person I would never have wanted to be. In her eyes there was a sadness heavy as if every word would free her but at the same time torment her. I had the world at my feet, but the price I paid was isolation and immense loneliness. I let myself be carried away by the need for validating attention, and I began to live for the image, to seek refuge in the admiring glances of the people. I felt that I was loved for what I represented, not for who I really was, and this superficial love left a void inside me that I could not fill. You see, the fame continued, the attention of the media. I deluded myself thinking that they completed me, that they could compensate for everything I did not find in the court, but they were only mirages. Each look, each applause made me feel for a moment less alone, but they always ended up leaving me empty, and I who once had faith had lost my way. I participated in the rituals, but my heart was far away, confused, caught in a vortex of appearances and illusions. The face marked by a deep shadow stopped here. In this place there is no applause, there are no titles. I am naked in front of my mistakes. I thought I could be a symbol for others, but I was nothing more than a faded figure, a shadow built on the expectations of the others. The love I sought outside gave me nothing true, and now I feel all the weight of the decisions that took me away from what matters. With a distant look and a sigh she concluded, I sought the adoration of the world, but I ended up losing my soul. I walked away from everything I believed in, and I understood it too late, how much I had let myself be blinded by the ephemeral splendor. Now I am here, prisoner of my illusions and my regrets, with nothing more to offer myself. Continuing down the dark path, I felt the weight of darkness increase around me. The temperature had dropped and the feeling of remorse and despair became more intense, as if I were in a valley of deep regrets. A new figure appeared before me with a face marked by a melancholic shadow. It was Whitney Houston. Her presence was impregnated with a sadness so deep that it seemed almost palpable, as if the echo of her voice still vibrated in that desolate place. Whitney looked at me with a fragile expression, her eyes still bright but burdened by pain. People knew me by my voice, by my strength on stage. Her voice began a whisper impregnated with regret, but inside me there was a silent battle, a pain that I could not smother. I tried to fill that void with fame, with applause, but nothing was enough. I was sucked dry by my own demons and by the people who fed on my fragility. Here I am forced to feel every echo of that fame like an endless void. My own successes seem to laugh at me now, leaving me with a feeling of loneliness that not even my voice can fill. As I looked at her, it was as if her successes, her glory and her pain were intertwined in an eternal torment. Whitney had been trapped between the desire to be loved and the destructive spiral into which she had fallen. It was a tragic reflection of a talent devoured by fame, destined to revive her own regrets. Shortly after, I heard an unusual noise, a rhythmic sound that sounded like a distant drum but slow and disturbing. In front of me, another tall figure appeared, wrapped in an aura of mystery and melancholy. It was Michael Jackson, his face marked by a torment that seemed endless. He looked at me with eyes full of sadness, his face marked by a mask of emotions difficult to interpret. "I have been revered by millions," said his voice, an almost broken whisper. "But I have lived a life of loneliness. All what I wanted was to regain my innocence, to feel free of all that weight. I tried to reinvent myself, to escape from my own image, but in the end I was a prisoner of the world that adored me." He paused, his eyes distant, then continued, "Here I can't escape the reality of what I have been. My soul is trapped in an endless cycle, steeped in expectations and judgments. I have suffered, and sometimes encouraged. I am forced to relive each step, each attempt to escape from myself, knowing there is no way out." Michael Jackson, he seemed like a soul in the balance between light and shadow, a man torn between his public image and his private vulnerability, destined to be swallowed by the void he had tried to fill in. I saw further in the shadow a silent figure watched me with a deep and intense gaze. It was Chadwick Boseman. His face calm but marked by a deep awareness unlike the others. Chadwick seemed immersed in a melancholic stillness, as if he understood the weight of the place he was in but faced it with dignity. "I tried to give meaning to my life, to leave something good," said his voice, calm but vibrant with emotion. "I strove to be an example to inspire those who looked at me, but I also knew the shadow of pride and vanity. Sometimes I gave too much value to my image, to the expectations of others, trying to be perfect in life. I dedicated myself to a cause, to a hope for the future, but I neglected to face some demons inside me." The gaze stopped still, directed to the void. "Now here I feel the weight of each moment, when I allowed the image to prevail over the person. Each time I wore a mask so as not to show my vulnerability. My regret is not having lived fully, always driven by the urgency to leave a legacy. But here too I understand that the true legacy is not in what is left but in what is really, and in that sense I fear having failed in something fundamental." Chadwick seemed to carry a more peaceful torment in internal reflection that kept him tied to that place. He was a soul aware of his own fragility and the weight of fame, destined to reflect for eternity on the decisions he had made. "After having lived this journey through the darkness, I feel that I have something to say that cannot remain silent. Every face I have met, every story that has been whispered to me has become a piece of my own soul, a reflection of what could happen to each one of us, if we are not careful about the path we choose. Whitney showed me how much we can be prisoners of what we desperately seek in others. Michael reminded me that running away from ourselves only leaves us further from peace. And Chadwick taught me that as much as we may aspire to be heroes to the world, we are vulnerable and sometimes fragile inside. They all lived great and intense lives, but each got lost in one way or another, in loneliness, in the need for approval, in sacrificing themselves. In the end I believe the true trap is not suffering or weakness, is never having the strength to face them. From every soul I have encountered I understood that our fears and desires can become chains if we are not willing to acknowledge them and work to break them. And I understood that to save ourselves we must truly be prepared to strip bare that of ourselves that we are afraid to look at. The redemption is not just forgiving or being forgiven, it is understanding our own fragilities and accepting them, because that is where true strength is found. Also I understood that perhaps this journey was granted to me for a reason, not to make me suffer or punish me, but to give me a new chance to remind myself of what really matters before it is too late. It is as if fate had made me descend into the darkest corners of the human soul to make me ascend with my eyes finally open. It showed me that every choice has a weight, and that every regret, if not, can become a prison that we will carry with us even beyond this life. Now as I return to my life I feel the need to do something different, to live in a way that leaves behind not only memories but acts of kindness, of forgiveness, of understanding. I feel the need to reach out to those I have hurt, to apologize, to make peace with the parties from me that I have always tried to ignore. I feel the responsibility to walk with sincerity and humility, knowing that it is never too late to change, that every day can be an opportunity to start over. This experience has taught me that no matter how much we may fall, there is always a possibility of redemption, if the heart is willing to seek it. To those who have heard this story I want to tell you not to be afraid to look inside yourself. Do not let regrets fill your lives. Be grateful for every breath, for every hug, for every laugh, and never postpone love, understanding, or forgiveness. Be kind to yourself and to those around you, because in the end it is only the good that we leave behind that can truly save us. And so I return to live with the humble hope that my journey can remind some of you that redemption is always possible, that our mistakes do not define us forever. Love, forgiveness, hope is a thin but indestructible thread, ready to guide us even when we think we have lost our way. Thank you for listening to this message. May it bring you peace and remind you that every soul can find the light even in the darkest depths. 19.